Capitol Hill. House Majority Leader and Democratic Representative from Maryland, Congressman Steny Hoyer. And also back in New York, we've got the host of the Dylan Ratigan Show, Dylan Ratigan. Oh, this should be good.
Oh, no doubt about it. There are a lot of questions out there this morning about whether the Democrats are going to be able to pass this or not. Let's
ask Steny Hoyer.
Let's go straight to Steny Hoyer. He, of course, is the Majority Leader of the United States House of Representatives. Steny, always great talking to you. Do you think you're going to be able to get enough votes to pass the president's tax plan?
Well, Joe, the first thing we have to find out is what the Senate can pass. We obviously have passed a bill which I think reflected what the Democrats believe was appropriate, and that is a cut in middle-income tax rates and make sure they don't go up in January. I think the overwhelming majority of the American public supported that policy, including Republicans. 52% in a CBS News poll showed that they supported that policy. However, obviously the Republicans would not vote for anything unless upper income taxes were frozen and the estate tax was changed, so that we're confronted with what the Senate's going to do. We'll see pretty soon, hopefully, what the Senate's going to do. And I think the objective that the president has tried to reach is the objective that we need to reach, and that is, on the one hand, we need to grow the economy. Obviously, we need to address the deficit in the longer term, but as Ben Bernanke said, if we don't address growing the economy in the short term, we're not going to be able to achieve the second objective of bringing the deficit down.
Steny, a lot of reports that House Democrats especially are very angry with the White House, that Joe Biden received a chilly reception on Capitol Hill. What are you doing to try to keep your caucus together?
Actually, I wouldn't characterize the reception that Vice President Biden got as chilly. I would characterize it as the expression of very substantial disagreement with the provisions regarding to high-income taxes and to the estate tax, which I think most Democrats don't believe will have any positive effect on growing the economy, but will simply make the deficit worse. I happen to agree with that prop. I think that's accurate. I don't think it's going to have a real effect on the economy, but it's clear that the Republicans have determined unless the wealthiest in America get benefits, then they won't vote for unemployment insurance. They won't vote for a cut in taxes in the 2% in the working men's wages on FICA, the Social Security tax. So that the president saw himself in a position where if we were going to get anything done, if going to be, and we could get it through the House, but if they were going to get anything through the Senate, they had to make an accommodation. We'll see what happens in the Senate, whether that's modified, and then we'll see what we do in the House. But it's clear,
but Steny,
it's clear, Joe, that we need to help grow the economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we have a delay here. But the question is, why not fight the fight and tell Republicans, hey, you know what, we will give you tax cuts, even for people making $250,000 to $1 million, but we're not going to give millionaires tax breaks. You look at a CBS poll that's out, 65% of Americans oppose giving tax cuts to people making over $250,000.
Yeah, Joe, I just made that point.
Push that up to $1 million. Yeah, right. You can win that battle. The question is, why didn't the president fight that fight and say, we're not giving millionaires cuts, and we're not going to let you to keep unemployment benefits away from families at Christmas?
I think almost all of us in the House would have been more pleased if we'd had a more vigorous expression of that to the American public and say this is where we are. And very frankly, as you have just pointed out, we're where the American people are. And as I said, Joe, 52% of the Republicans polled agree with us in that CBS News poll. So, yes, I'm disappointed that we didn't make a more vigorous fight. I'm frankly disappointed that when they took the vote last Saturday that we didn't have a full-fledged filibuster, so the American people would have had the opportunity to see in the Senate where in a majority, 53 in both instances, agreed with the proposition you've just set forward. 53 senators said 250 and under. 53 senators said $1 million and under should be the cap. Unfortunately, in the Senate, a majority doesn't rule. The minority rules, unfortunately.
We understand the math of that. We just don't understand, I personally don't understand why the Republicans aren't being called out on their own words and their own concerns about spending. And honestly, we have a lot of CEOs, Joe, obviously on our show, and people who are very, very rich. Every single one we've asked, are you glad you got to keep your tax cut? Haven't heard one say, yeah, I really am. I mean, I'm sorry. It's disgusting.
They're right.
I think these people, yeah, they are right. Dylan Ratigan, though, overall...
That's, of course, what the House did. You understand? We passed through the House what I think reflected the majority view in this country, and that is 250 and under. You get a tax cut, but if you're over that, that's not going to spur the economy, and very frankly, you're going to be able to put food on your table. We've got two major problems, creating jobs and in the long term bringing deficits down. This doesn't help doing that latter one.
Okay, and in terms of creating jobs, at least, let's go to Dylan Ratigan now. Overall, in terms of the plan that we're looking at, that they're potentially going to get through here, will it have a positive effect on the economy? Are we looking at better days ahead?
No, not that I honestly have the answer to that question, but if you look at the body of research in terms of the incremental change in job creation through the estimates of anybody who looks at this, through the banking community, through the analyst community, it's very limited. You talk about those CEOs, Mika. You know, you get the tax cut, it's a little extra money to invest in China. Remember, we have a situation where you've got mercantilist trading practices that are sucking money out of our country. That is costing us jobs. We are blowing money out of this country on energy. We have a healthcare system that costs 19% of our GDP, which compares to a country like Germany at 12%. And instead of actually addressing an exquisitely expensive healthcare system, rigged trading practices with China, or foreign oil imports from the Middle East that fund people that want to kill us, we borrow money from our children to give tax cuts and other forms of economic stimulation that really help take money further out of the country. The good news is with the tax cut money for the rich, is like I said, they've got a few extra dollars to invest in China.
Can I say that I agree with everything that was just said? I think the tax cuts for the wealthiest in America make no economic sense. They don't accomplish the objective of trying to help with the deficit in the long term, and they are simply the position the Republican Party has taken in both the House and the Senate, that in order for them to take any action to either grow the economy or to give middle-income working people an assurance that their taxes aren't going to go up, that we had to make some sort of deal. That's what the president was confronted with. We'll see whether the House or Senate go along with that.
Mike Barnicle, do you have a question for Steny Hoyer?
I do, Congressman. You know, we understand, as you just explained, that you don't know what's going to come out of the Senate on the way over to the House. But within your caucus right now, what is the biggest hurdle for those who are opposed to this proposal?
Well, I think the estate tax, I think, is perceived to be the most egregious. We're talking about 32,000 additional people. We passed a bill, as you know, over a year ago, which adopted what was in place in 2009, the $3.5 million per spouse exemption. That was $7 million and a 45% rate. That was in place. We thought that was, some people thought that was too high at that point in time, but it was a reasonable compromise. Now we have substantially increased that from 7 to 10 million. 32,000, 39,000 families going to be affected by that, but it's going to cost billions of dollars to do that and make the deficit worse, and will have none positive effect on the economy. We think that is not a good good action to take, and I think that's the item. I also think the upper income tax freeze doesn't make sense either from the House's perspective. However, I think the most egregious response has been to, or the most vigorous response has been to the estate tax deal.
Congressman Hoyer, the Democrats in Congress were in a position of great power and leverage 3 or 4 months ago, in September, October, before the midterm elections, when people knew the Republicans were going to gain a lot of seats and maybe control the House. You guys could have done whatever you wanted in terms of the Bush tax cuts, and yet you chose not to, which seems to me at least to undercut some of the outrage on the part of some members in your caucus that the president has made this deal. How many people in your caucus were adamant about let's take this on back in September, October when they had a chance. And to what extent do you think that kind of robs you of some of the righteous outrage that people now feel?
Well, I don't accept your premise, and I don't think the facts support your premise. When you say we could have done anything we wanted to, obviously the House of Representatives has about 400 plus bills that it has passed in the House of Representatives, given the rules. Very frankly, you can operate as we expect in a democracy with a majority vote. We have some 400 plus bills pending in the United States Senate, including the estate tax at 3.5 million exemption for each individual. And that is still pending over a year in the United States Senate. Why? Because the United States Senate cannot pass things with simply a majority vote. So when you say we had the overwhelming power to do that, it is clear over the last 2 years that the filibuster had precluded making policy in the United States Senate, except after capitulation with the Republican minority that said they wouldn't do things unless they were accommodated. The state tax and the high income freeze on taxes is evidence of that. In the present context, we're still where we were essentially, and we're still having the same problem with a minority ruling in the United States Senate.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist here. We've heard even just this morning members of your own caucus there in the House express their great disappointment with President Obama for what they say is a caving in to Republicans on this issue. He obviously takes exception with that. Do you share their frustration? Are you disappointed in the president for agreeing to this deal?
I think we're all frustrated that we could not adopt policies that are consistent with what the overwhelming majority of Americans believe is good, sound policy.
Should the president have made this deal then?
I think the president should have made a fight that would have made it clearer to the American public the distinctions between those of us who wanted to adopt policies that would grow jobs and give middle-income working Americans relief without holding hostage the wealthiest in our country. Do I think the president could have done that perhaps more vigorously? The answer is yes. Does my caucus think that's the case? Yes. But in the final analysis, the president was confronted with a reality, as we all are, of a sufficient number of Republicans, indeed all of the Republicans in the United States Senate, who said unless the wealthiest are given a break, then we're not going to give a break to those who are unemployed or to those who are working Americans who are struggling and we don't want to increase their tax burden.
Yeah, help me out here, though, Stinny, because this is the one thing I haven't been able to understand. And I thought, just politically, the president should have fought harder for tax cuts for people making $1 million plus. And as you know, I love tax cuts. I'm talking about how do you get working class Americans back to work and move that to capital gains cuts, if that anything but that. But here's my question, though. Well, you guys are still in charge. You still have a 70-plus vote majority in the House. You still have a 17, 18 vote majority in the Senate. Why can't you guys convince enough Democrats to stay with you in the House?
In the House? Well, Joe, we passed things in the House. We have enough Democrats in the House, and we passed the policies. We passed a tax bill which did exactly what you just said. Said working people ought to not have their taxes increased, but on the other hand, those of us who are doing much better ought to help participate in what the American public also said was a problem, and that is bringing down the deficit.
So if that's the case, Sandy, you guys could pass it again, and you could pass something that excludes millionaires, and you could stare down the Senate and say we're not going along with. I mean, as you know, we did that a few times back in the 90s, and it brought Bill Clinton to the table.
Joe, well, if you were in the Senate, you perhaps could help us. But, you know, you've had 41 senators in lockstep on this. Republican senators have said they won't do anything unless their tax policies are passed, which deal with both the estate tax. Kyle has made that very clear. He's the second-ranking leader in the Senate on the Republican side. So, yes, we could do that again. We have the votes to do that again. But the issue is whether or not that would have any effect in the United States Senate. There's no indication that any Republican senator is prepared to make that compromise. And given the rules in the Senate.
The bill does not become law unless the House of Representatives says it becomes the law.
Joe, here's what is of great concern to the president and others. Yes, it doesn't. So what happens on January 1st? Let's say we take our position and they take their position. I hope to see some changes in the bill when it comes to the Senate. Perhaps we'll affect some changes in the House when it does. But what happens on January 1st? On January 1st, we've already had unemployment insurance lapse, which means that 2 million people don't have any resources to put food on their tables. Secondly, we're going to have an increase in the taxes on working Americans. That resulted, as you know, from the policies put in place under the Republicans when they were in charge in 2001. They did it for budget purposes. They didn't want to show the real cost of their tax cuts to the economy and to the Treasury. They did not cut spending. In fact, they increased spending during that period of time.
That's right.
So we were confronted with huge deficits. So the President and the Congress are confronted with an increase in middle-income taxes if we continue to have gridlock, and no extension of unemployment insurance. Both of those will undermine the economy. And the President obviously made a judgment. We're going to have to determine whether we're going to make a similar judgment as to whether or not putting the economy at risk and putting millions of Americans at risk in their homes and their families in surviving, or whether or not we're going to play a game of political chicken. Unfortunately, the Republicans have been prepared to play that game in protecting the wealthiest in our country. We don't want to put the non-wealthy in our country at such risk, so we'll see what we can do.
All right, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the show. Thanks for your
Good
honesty.
luck.
Obviously,
Enjoyed
they wanted
being
a more
with you.
vigorous debate.
And we need the good luck.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
Always great talking to you, Steny.